John chapter 18, verse 1. Read down through verse 11. While you're turning there, last time we talked about how to deal with temptations, dealing with sorrow. Jesus gave a perfect example of that right before his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. He isn't experiencing that sorrow because of the events of the cross. It's the dread of the thought of the worst part of the penalty of sin, which is the separation from God that he has to experience, even though that's just for a few hours there on the cross. But when he's dealing with that sorrow there, he does what most people do. He wants the people that are closest to him there with him, and that's what most people do during deep sorrow. And so he goes apart with Peter, James, and John. Those are the three closest disciples to him on the earth. And so you remember, he goes just a little bit further than them. He's just a stone's throw away. They can still see him. They can still hear him. They're supposed to just be a source of strength for him. And Jesus tells them to pray, to watch, to be alert there, and just be there with him there. Instead, they do what? Fall asleep. First time he comes back, he wakes them up and says, couldn't you watch with me just 1 hour, just a short period of time? And he goes back and prays again. You remember, it's like drops of blood. The capillaries are bursting under the skin and coming out with his sweat there. It's so intense there, that dread of being separated from God, they fall asleep again. Right? And so he lets them sleep, and they do gain some physical strength, but that wasn't what Jesus was trying to help them with. You remember, instead of them being the source of strength for Jesus, God sends the angel down to be a comfort to Jesus there. And so they gain physical strength, but then they're remaining weak in that area of dealing with sorrow. And so this week we're going to see a next question that Jesus asked. This is at his arrest in John 18, verse 1 through 11. We will pick up some other places, parallel scriptures in the other Gospels. But John 18, verse 1 says, "When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where was a garden, into the which he entered, and his disciples. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus ofttimes resorted thither with his disciples. Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. Jesus therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, Whom seek ye? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus saith unto them, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. As soon then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. Then asked he them again, Whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore ye seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spake, Of them which thou gavest me, I have lost none. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and smote the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus unto Peter, Put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? This is the hour that has come. The time for Jesus to go ahead and move toward his death, so he can be resurrected, of course. The Jews have tried multiple times to take Jesus' life. We've seen that as we've studied through on Wednesday evening. There's the flip side of that is some of them, he's so popular with the crowds, wanted to try to force him to be a king at that time. That is not going to happen as long as the Jews as a whole have rejected their Messiah. And so we knew that was delayed, and that's still a future time for them. But the response when any of those events happened, or they tried to do those certain things, the same response we get in Scripture over and over again. My hour is not yet come. My hour is not yet come. My hour is not yet come. He says that over and over again. And now the hour has come. The hour he's talking about is his death. That has come. Back in John chapter 12 and verse 23. John chapter 12 and verse 23 and 24. He says, "And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come, that the Son of Man should be glorified." And the next verse says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." Talking about his coming death there. That's the hour. And over in John 13, there in verse 1, it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end." And so the hour, that time for him to depart out of the world has come. And then John 17:1, there he says, "These words spake Jesus, and lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, Father, the hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son may also glorify thee." And so the hour that he's talking about is not a single hour of time like we know an hour. It's talking about the final part of his physical life on earth. We understand that through our study of Revelation and Leroy's study of Isaiah on Sunday mornings. We talk about in the day of the Lord. We're talking about the end times. It's not one single day. It's the days, the events leading up to the one day when Christ comes back at his second coming. But all of those things are included in the day of the Lord. And so that's the same idea here when you see this hour. His hour has come. And so that's what it's leading up to. But of all the things that Christ has suffered so far, things that have caused him sorrow, one thing that is still missing is Jesus hasn't suffered physically yet. You remember Satan tempted him at first, right after his baptism, to jump off the peak of the Temple Mount. If you got that map, we can use that one here too. But down here in this, let's see, it would be southeast corner, down here in this part. Up here on the top of the Temple Mount, you see that part there? The Antonia Fortress up there. That is basically ground level there at the mount there of Jerusalem. That's ground level there on that side. As you move toward the south, there on the other side of the Temple Mount, there's a steep decline. The terrain is going down there. That's the side of the mountain there. Herod, of course, built a whole bunch of retaining walls, things to extend the Temple Mount, and built those up. The part that you see today, if you go to Jerusalem there, the Western Wall is part of that base that he helped build up for the temple to build on. The actual temple walls are gone. Just like Jesus said, there wouldn't be one stone left upon another. Those were all dismantled by the Roman soldiers when the gold and stuff melted in them cracks, and they pried every one of them apart to get every last drop they could get out. And so that's all gone. So the only thing you see now is part that Herod did to establish that, built that up on that side and those kind of things. So if you go down to that southeast corner, this bottom corner right here of the Temple Mount, if you were to stand up on that wall and look down, that's estimated somewhere over 100 feet, 150 feet maybe, from the wall to the bottom of the Kidron Valley. That's what he was tempting him to do when he talks about the pinnacle of the temple there. He's talking about on one of those corners there, and he says, well, just jump off the side. The Bible says that your angels will give charge over you, and you won't even dash your foot against a stone, right? You won't even stub your toe, right? They won't let that happen to you. And of course, that was the temptation there. And so, as far as we've seen in Scripture, Jesus has not suffered physically, not so much as a stubbed toe up until this period of time, right? And you say, well, why does he have to suffer physically? When they killed the lambs, Jesus comes to be our Passover lamb, right? The Lamb of God. When they kill those lambs, the animal sacrifices for sin, that's a very fast process, right? They're not trying to make the lambs suffer before they die. They split their throat, they bleed out very quickly, they die very quickly. It's not a very painful process for them. That's the most humane way to do that. But if Jesus is going to be our Passover lamb, why does he have to suffer more than any other human being has ever suffered? Right? Why does that have to happen? Well, part of that we talk about is the wrath of God. The wrath of God has to fall on Christ for our sins. That's part of it. But there's something else. And Jesus has already gotten the peace over the worst part of the suffering that's to come, which is his separation from the Father. He's going to have, when he takes on the sin of the world, he has to have that separation from the Father. And you see the darkness while he's on the cross there, about 3 hours there, and he cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That's the time of separation. But he understands. He prayed that if it were possible that would pass from him, that he'd go through all the pain, all the torture, all the abuse, the mocking, all those kind of things, as long as he didn't have to go through that part. But he says, if it's not possible, right, your will, not mine. And so that's how he's finally made his peace with that. He's accepted that, and he's gone on. But now he is going to have to suffer physically. Right? And he has suffered verbal abuse from all kinds of different individuals, right, throughout his ministry there. He suffered emotionally. He suffered psychologically. He has suffered when other people are suffering through empathy, right, where he feels the feelings that they're feeling. He cries with some, and you see that the different types of suffering, but he hasn't suffered physically yet, and he has to. Right? Why does he have to? Look at Hebrews 4 verse 15. Has to happen. Has to. Hebrews 4 and verse 15. He has to suffer physical pain. In Hebrews 4 verse 15 he says, for we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. If Jesus is going to be tempted in all points, as we are, yet without sin, he has to experience physical pain also, because we are tempted during times of physical pain. We understand that. Sometimes you're tempted to say something, right? You know, my grandfather used to smash his finger, and you could tell he wanted to say something, right? And he would sock it in his mouth real quick, I think to keep his lips from moving. Just, you know, there's a temptation sometimes to say things that you're not going to be, God's not going to be pleased with for certain. Sometimes there's a temptation that if you're hurting physically, you're suffering of some kind of pain, there's a temptation to hurt other people. Sometimes you just lash out at them verbally. Sometimes it's physical too, right? There's that temptation to do that. Sometimes when we're suffering physical pain, there's a temptation of pride. Now, what's the temptation of pride if you're suffering physically? Well, maybe I'm hurting, right? And I'm hurting pretty bad, but you're not feeling bad enough for me. Right, you're not, I'm not getting enough sympathy out of you, right? You know, that's the way my dad used to do it. You'd mash your finger or cut yourself or something on the job, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just go, you know, yeah. You know, I'm just not getting enough attention. That you know, if Mom would see us, she said, "Let me see that, Kenny. He's really hurt now. Come on, you know." And she'd start babying you and loving you and doing all that kind of stuff. But there is a temptation. We want people to know sometimes when we're hurting. And we want them to feel really bad for us. We want them to sympathize for us. And that is a temptation of pride. Right? But this group that has come here in John 18, the ones that have come to take Jesus, they will hurt him. Right? They will severely. It's coming. They're going to be participants in all of that. Some of them aren't actually going to be the ones laying the lashes, but they're going to be responsible for it. Some of these are Roman soldiers, so they may actually be the ones who are involved in that. We can't be for certain on that. But even though they've come to arrest him, they are going to hurt him physically there. Jesus demonstrates his power right there in verse 6. Right? And the power that he shows them there is they can't take him unless he lets them take him. Right? That's a big deal here. Right? And even though he demonstrates his power to them, he knows they're going to hurt him, but he still doesn't hurt them. Right? He resists that temptation there. When you see that in verse 6 of John 18, as soon then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. Now, they just all fall backward. Right? He speaks and they fall backward. Now, that's not one of those things where they smash their head against a rock, or it's the equivalent of stumbling down, right? Losing their footing. Right? They're not injured in that way. They just can't stand at that time. And Jesus has demonstrated, hey, if I don't want you to be standing up, you won't be standing up. Right? That's what he's doing there for them. And he's demonstrating that for his disciples too. But Jesus has told them back in John 16:33, he's told them, these things have I spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Now he's demonstrating the peace, the good cheer, the comfort of knowing that he is in the perfect will of the Father. Right? And what happens? Well, we talked about last time how easy it is for them to see this huge mob of people coming through the garden there, through the Mount of Olives, through those trees there. They're carrying lanterns and torches, right? It's going to be easy to see them from a good ways off there, that they're coming for him, right? And we talked about that. Jesus doesn't move away from them. He goes toward them. There in verse 4 of John 18, he says, Jesus therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, whom seek ye? He went forth. He goes directly to them there and asks that question, whom seek ye? Right? He's moving toward the people that are getting ready to hurt him. Right? That's hard, isn't it? It really is. Most of the time, if you know somebody's going to hurt you, you do what? You avoid them. you stay away from them if at all possible. You know they're going to hurt you. Some that's verbally, some that's just psychologically or emotionally. And our temptation is to avoid them. Jesus doesn't do that at all. He moves toward them. And in doing that, he's not surrendering to the enemy. He's moving toward the victory over the enemy. That's what he's doing here. You see there in verse 4 that he knows what's coming. Back in John 18:1, though, he says, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where was a garden into the which he entered, and his disciples. And we talked about this last week when they went over the brook there. If you got your map there, you see they come out of the temple there. They cross down. The Kidron Valley is this valley running up the east side. And like I said, this is the highest point up here, and it runs downhill toward the south there. The brook runs down through the middle of the Kidron Valley there. It's very steep coming out of Jerusalem. And so up here at the upper part, they would come cross the brook. You see a place where they think the Garden of Gethsemane is here in that little corner there, and then on up the Mount of Olives there. And of course, if you look over here to the far side, you'll see on the other side of the Mount of Olives, the Jericho Road runs across through there. And Bethany's over there. That's where Lazarus and Mary and Martha live. It's about 1.5 miles or 2 miles from Jerusalem to Bethany. So that kind of puts your mind maybe in perspective of where they're at. And so, when they came from the city of Jerusalem, they go down that steep grade, they cross the brook there at the Kidron Valley, and they go back up the other side to the Mount of Olives. They're going to a familiar place, right? And so you see the Temple Mount is right there on that side of the city, right there adjacent to the Kidron Valley there. And so when they killed those sacrificial lambs and stuff there at the Temple Mount, that blood is channeled out of the city there. It runs down that steep grade to the Kidron Valley. It goes in that brook that runs down through there, and then it's carried away. That's what's happening when they do those sacrifices there. And so, even though the official observance of the Passover by the Jews in Jerusalem won't be until Friday evening, they begin offering those sacrifices about the same time that Jesus dies on the cross. And they offer those, they celebrate that. But you remember we talked about this before. Jesus has already celebrated the Passover with his disciples the evening before. This is in the middle of the night, after midnight on Friday morning. But Thursday evening, there, he's already celebrated with his disciples the Passover, and we talked about that. The Jews in the north observed the start of the days differently than the Jews, that's the Galilee and those regions up that way. The Jews in the south, which is in Judea, where Jerusalem and them are, they observed a different beginning of the day there, and so they celebrated the Passover at different times. And so one group, the Jews from the north, have celebrated the Passover on Thursday evening. The Jews in the south, there in Jerusalem, will celebrate Friday evening. And so that's to come yet. But what has happened, and we talked about that actually helped the priests, because they've got thousands and thousands of lambs to kill. Right? They have a record, it's shortly after this, not at the time when Jesus has died, but they have ancient records of that where they killed 250,000 lambs at one time for Passover. 250,000 lambs. That's a bunch of people piled into Jerusalem. That's a lot of blood flowing out of the city. So if they did half of them on one day and half of them on the next day, you're still talking about 100,000 lambs or more. That the blood is running out, running down in that brook, and then going down the Kidron Valley. Right? And so, but that has already begun Thursday evening. They've already begun killing those lambs. And so that blood is already in that brook. When they come down to the city and they cross over that brook to go up the Mount of Olives, they can see that blood from those lambs running down that brook there, even at nighttime. Look at verse 2 of John 18. It says, "And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus oft times resorted thither with his disciples." This is a familiar place where Jesus takes his disciples, because they have been here often. Often they come here. And many people in Jerusalem, the way the city is laid out, there's not a lot of places for farmland or anything like that. And so if they have those kind of things, it's outside the city most of the time. And so people that lived in the city would have sometimes gardens on the Mount of Olives and the adjacent property. And this is one example of that. These people have a private garden of some sort on the Mount of Olives, and it's called Gethsemane, which means oil press. It kind of reminds you of back in the parable there of the man who's going to lend out his vineyard in Matthew chapter 21. He's got a husband there. He prepares the vineyard. He plants the vines. He has the wine press ready. He's got the tower. Everything's ready. And then he's going to lend it out to other husbandmen. That's kind of what's going on at the garden here. You've got the olive trees on the mount there. They got a place to press out the oil. And those would often, they'd be hedged about, just like a grape place would be, or they'd have a wall around them, give them some privacy, those kind of things, protect it from animals getting in there and destroying the crops. But this is a place that they have come to multiple times. This is somebody's private garden that has given Jesus and his disciples access to it often. Often. And maybe that's just for a chance for them to get away from the crowds, just to get some rest. And also, they come here multiple times to sleep. And so, when Jesus is preparing the Passover with his disciples the evening before this is in the darkness, Friday morning, early Friday morning. But you remember, he didn't want Judas Iscariot to know where the upper room was going to be. You remember? He sends Peter and John, says, go prepare the upper room. And he says, you're going to find a guy, remember, carrying the water pot, follow him to this guy's house and make ready the Passover there. And he doesn't want Judas to know where that is, because he doesn't want him to come before he finishes teaching the disciples those final lessons this evening before. And so, but this is a place that he's kind of made home here near Jerusalem. Look back in John chapter 7, verse 53. You'll see some examples of this. John 7, verse 53. You see here, and after this is at the close of the day, he says, and every man went unto his own house. And then the next verse is in chapter 8, verse 1. Jesus went into the Mount of Olives. And then verse 2, and early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. So he dismisses the people. They go back to their homes, he goes and sleeps in the Mount of Olives. Right? The next morning, he comes back early to the temple and starts teaching again. So, he stays there. Judas Iscariot might not know exactly where they're going to be. Right? This is a place that they come often when they're there in Jerusalem. Look over in Luke chapter 21, verse 37. Luke 21, verse 37. Judas Iscariot might not know because they do stay at other people's houses. They do go other places. They travel around. But Jesus is establishing a habit for them now. This is going to be a place they come back to over and over and over again, especially this last week of his life, before he's killed, In Luke 21, 37 through 39, and in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple for to hear him. Right? So that's the same kind of idea. He goes out and he sleeps in this garden. Look at Luke chapter 22, verse 39, one chapter over. It says in Luke 22:39, and he came out and went as he was wont to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples also followed him. He goes out and stays in the Mount of Olives as he was wont, W-O-N-T, which is it's his habit to do that. That's what that word means. Not that he wants to, W-A-N-T. It's a habit that he's establishing there. And so this week leading up to his crucifixion, Jesus has become very predictable. Right? Very predictable. I'm a creature of habit. I don't know if you guys are or not, but I come home every evening. There's a certain routine I go in depending on which day of the week it is. If I'm going to sit down at my desk and study, I'll go in the bedroom. I'll take out my wallet, take out my keys. I've got a certain place to put all of those things, and then I'll come back and sit down. Sheila says, "Do you have any pop?" And I say, "No." She, I'll fix you some. She brings me some pop, and I sit down and study. And I just have a certain routine. In the morning, it's got to be the same way. There's certain things that I do every morning exactly the same way, and if I mess one of them up, right, it'll wreck something. Right? I do it at the post office all the time. There's a certain order that I get my scanner in and do certain things in the morning. If somebody comes and talks to me in the middle of it and I get distracted, sometimes I'll forget and then I'll be messed up. I'll have to, oh man, I forgot to do this, I forgot to do that, have to go back. So, but he is establishing a habit here for them. So Judas will know exactly where he's going to be. That's on purpose there. Jesus is planning out these details. He wants Judas to find them in this garden. Right? And so, this is all intentional. Why does he want... Look back in John chapter 10, verse 17. Why do the disciples need to be there? We understand why he might have wanted those closest to him when he's praying there to see if there's any other possible way to provide redemption without having to have the separation from the Father for that time. We understand him wanting them there for that. But why do they need to be there when he's going to be arrested? Because Jesus has already told them they're going to run away anyway, right? They're going to forsake him. They're going to flee, right? He's already told them they're going to do that. But Jesus has made an important statement in John chapter 10, verse 17 and 18. It says this, "Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father." Jesus has assured them that he is going to lay down his life. They're not going to take his life. He is going to lay it down. He's going to give it willingly. Right? He's already demonstrated part of that when he knocked them down there just by talking to them. They're not going to take him unless he allows them to take him. Right? There are times, that Jesus was alone, right? Even though for a short period of time, sometimes he goes into a mountain alone to pray, right? We know he sent his disciples into the ship across the Sea of Galilee. He was alone there for a time. Then he comes walking across in the middle of the storm to them. And Peter walks on the water for a bit. So we know there are times that he is alone, right, for a brief period of times. But he wants the disciples to see this. He wants them to see that he's laying down his life, that they're not just coming, going to arrest him and kill him, and he didn't have any choice in the matter. That's what's going on. Look at Luke 22, verse 53. Luke 22, verse 53. This is Jesus talking here. He says, "When I was daily with you in the temple, ye stretched forth no hands against me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." He was available to be arrested multiple times. Even after they said they were looking to take him, they were trying to find ways to kill him. And every day he kept coming back to the temple and teaching and showing himself there in front of them. Why didn't they do it? Well, one of those reasons in Matthew, what is it?
It wasn't time.
It wasn't time. Yeah, it's not the hour yet. Matthew 26, 4 and 5 is another one of those examples. Matthew 26, 4 and 5. "And consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, Not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people." They don't want to start a riot. There are people who've been healed, people that have been helped by Jesus in multiple ways, and he's popular with that group. And so they know if they arrest him right there when thousands and thousands of people have gathered for the Feast of Passover in Jerusalem, that's going to cause an uproar there. Right? And we talked about this before. It doesn't matter. That's exactly when he's going to be killed, at the feast day. But that's what they're trying to avoid, because as you know there from your little map, the Antonia Fortress is right there adjacent to the Temple Mount. That's the Roman soldiers' fort. That's got barricades in it. They have people stationed in there. That's to keep order on the Temple Mount and in Jerusalem there. And so they don't want to start a riot. But you remember Jesus' disciples, when they were in Bethany, just about a mile and a half, 2 miles here, just on the other side of the Mount of Olives, right? They were afraid to come to Bethany when Lazarus was sick, because they're thinking, that's too close to Jerusalem. They're going to kill him if we get that close, right? And you remember Jesus says, no, we're going to go see our friend Lazarus, right? And then one of them says, well, let's go die with him. He's going to get killed there, so we just might as well go get killed with him, right? That was what happened. They were afraid to even get that close. And then now Jesus is showing himself every day, and they're not taking him. They're not killing him. Right? God's working this out. You notice there in that verse, you probably turned from it now, but Luke 22:53 that we read, he says, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. And what he was saying there is God's hour and their hour have now lined up. His hour to die and their hour to kill him have now lined up with each other, and God's going to let it happen. He is going to allow the power of darkness to be involved there. Satan's plans are lining up with God's plans, and it's going to happen. Back in John 18 and verse 3, he says, John 18:3, Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches with weapons. Now, Jesus has already single-handedly ran all of those merchants out of the Temple Mount. You remember they come in there, they're selling the sacrifices, they've got the different animals, they've got the birds, they've got the money changers there, and all the priests and the people associated with the temple are profiting from that venture there. They're getting a cut out of that. That's why they're allowing it to happen. He did that at the beginning of his ministry too and drove them all out. And now 3 years plus later, the same thing is happening again. And he drives them out again, all by himself. He won't even let them walk through with their stuff. No, you're leaving. Right? And he runs them out. He has demonstrated great power in that respect there. And so when they come to take him, right, they've got plenty of help. They've got a lot of people in this group when they come to take him there. And so the band of men there that you see from John 18:3, the band of men is a spira, which is a Roman cohort. A Roman cohort is about 600 men. Now, sometimes a spira or cohort could be a detachment you'd have your group of 600, and maybe you'd have a detachment that you'd send off to do another task there. That could be a couple hundred men out of that 600. And you say, well, is it 200 men or is it 600 men? Well, we get pretty specific details. In John 18, verse 12 there, it says, then the band and the captain and officers of the Jews took Jesus and bound him. Now, if this Roman cohort has the captain, what's that tell you? It's not 200 men, is it? It's the big group. If the captain's with them, that's the big group. Right? The captain doesn't go out on a detachment. So this is likely about 600 men that they brought with them there. And so that's just the Roman soldiers. That's just the Roman soldiers. And then they've got the officers from the temple. And like we said, that group would have been dispatched from Fort Antonio, or here on our maps called the Antonio Fortress there. And that's there on that northwest side of the Temple Mount. But they're aware of Jesus' power. They're aware of his popularity. And so they're not taking any chances. They come with a big group of men to take him there. And they are fully armed. Fully armed. They've got swords, they've got staves, which is clubs, right? And so they've got a lot of weapons here. It's interesting that the time of Passover, it's a full moon. Full moon. Right? You know how it is on a full moon, clear night, those kind of things. You know, you can just about walk outside like it's daylight in full moon, right? That's what's going on here, but they don't try to sneak up on Jesus. They come with lanterns and torches, right? Which means, even though they can see Jesus and his disciples, what are they expecting him to do when they come to arrest him? Well, first, probably expecting him to run. Run. That's what the normal person would do if they could get away, right? And so they're likely expecting him that he'll try to hide in the cover of the olive trees, and they're going to have to use their torches and their lanterns and stuff to try to locate him and track him down, those kind of things, right? And so maybe escape out of their hands, and they've got this abundance of weapons also because they might also fight. They might fight back and try to resist, and so they've got that. Matthew 26:48, this is talking about how Judas is going to identify him there. I could say it's a full moon, but it still is. There is some darkness. There's some obscurity. It's not clear as daylight necessarily there. But Luke 26:48, he says, now that he that betrayeth him gave them a sign, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And so Judas has made this arrangement here. When we get up here to this group of disciples there, I'm going to kiss Jesus, and you'll know which one he is out of the 11 there. Hold him. Right? He's the one that they're after there. And so Judas has agreed to identify him with a kiss. Now, when he comes there to the disciples, this looks like a gesture of reconciliation, where he's coming back to the group. He comes, he embraces Jesus, kisses him on the cheek. It's like, I'm really one of you all. That's what he's trying to portray. He's the ultimate hypocrite there, right? But you remember, when they come, right, Jesus goes toward them there. They're coming toward him, and he says what? Whom seek ye? Right? Twice he said that. Both times he's answered, Jesus of Nazareth. Right? They've said Jesus of Nazareth, and he said what? I'm he. I'm he. Right? You know, they've assumed Jesus will run. They'll assume that maybe his disciples and he will fight. Right? They also might have assumed that one of his disciples would lie for him. Right? They come in the cover of darkness there, and they're looking for Jesus, and one of them pops up and says, I'm Jesus. Right? And maybe they grab Peter and then the rest of them run away with Jesus, you know. And they say, well, you know, he might try to do something like that. And Judas says, no, I'm going to point him out to you. I'm going to kiss him. I'm going to let you know which one it is there in the darkness there. But a kiss in their culture described different kinds of relationships. And I found this really interesting as I was studying. A kiss on the hand. Right? A kiss on the hand. You've probably seen movies there where they took a person of dignity's hand there and kissed their hand there. That's an expression that you are the inferior to them. If you kiss someone's hand, right, like a king or a queen or even a young lady, right, that's a sign that you're recognizing yourself as inferior to them if you kiss the hand. Right? If you move on down to the feet, right, if you kiss the feet of a person, right, you're identifying yourself as a slave and them as a master. We see that when the woman who's in Simon the Pharisee's house and she washes his feet and she kisses them. She's identifying herself as a slave and he is her master, right, and Lord. That's what's happening with the kiss of the feet. A kiss on the cheek, though, that's just a general greeting. That's a greeting of fellowship, much like we would shake hands today. That's just part of their culture there, kiss on the cheek. That's a greeting of a friend, a companion, someone that you consider an equal. That's what that gesture meant. So when Judas comes and he kisses Jesus on the cheek there, he's treating him like a friend.
And Jesus calls him friend.
Like an equal. And Jesus calls him friend. Right? He calls him friend. Even though Judas is not a friend to Jesus, right? Satan has already entered Judas, but he still wants to portray the image that he is Jesus' friend, even though he is his enemy there. He has done this out of hatred, out of greed, right? But Jesus didn't single out Judas in the upper room. You remember when Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me? And they're all saying, well, is it me? Is it me? Am I the one? Right? And he doesn't single him out. You remember Peter motions to John. John's leaning on Jesus. And he's, find out who it is. Find out who it is. And he does tell John there, the one who dips the sop, dips the bread in the dip with me, is the one who betray me. But that's there's no public declaration there. Then when Judas leaves there, he says, that thou doest thou quickly, right? Go out, and he's going out to betray him, right? But you remember the disciples thought that they were sending Judas out on an errand, maybe to buy something or give something to the poor. He was the treasurer, held the bag for the group. They didn't have any idea what was going on. Jesus didn't make that public example to them, right? But look at Luke 22:47. In Luke 22:47 and 48, like I say, in the upper room, he didn't do that. He didn't try to humiliate him, didn't try to separate him from the group in any way there. But Luke 22:47 and 48 gives us a little different picture about this. He says, and while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? Now Jesus does identify Judas here as the betrayer. Now, he has come back. He has kissed him like a friend there, to embrace him, act like he's one of them, being reunited with the group there. But Jesus has told the disciples that one of them would betray him. Now it's happening, and now he's showing them that as God, he knows that Judas is the one. That he can't hide anything from God. God knows the heart. He knows Judas's heart. He knows what's going on. Right? But you remember both times when Jesus asked, whom seek ye? He had said Jesus of Nazareth, and he uses those two words, I am. Right? Now in our Bible, it says, I am he. Now if you look very close in your Bible, the he is probably in italics, isn't it? Can you tell that? Right? The he is in italics. Now any of the words in italics means what? They're not in the original language. Right? That's been added by an interpreter along the way to help give some clarification to it. But what Jesus says there when they're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, he says, I am. Right? Why does that sound familiar? The I am. Yeah? Remember Jesus or God using that term with Moses? Right? He says, who sent you? And you say, the I am. I am is it's called the Tetragrammaton, which is the 4 letters named for God, which is YHWH. Yahweh is how we don't even know exactly how to pronounce it. It's the most sacred name for God among the Jews, and they rarely use that name out loud, spoke it. We've lost the pronunciation of it. YHWH. We add the vowels in there and say Yahweh, right? It is interpreted oftentimes as Jehovah in Scripture. It's the self-existent God, not the I was. It's the I am. I have always existed. I continue to exist. I will always exist. And that's the title he uses for it. In Isaiah 11:4, I'll just read this to you. He says, "But with righteousness shall he judge the poor and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked." Jesus can speak them out of existence right now if he chooses to. That's what's going to happen at the Battle of Armageddon. When he comes back, he's just going to speak them out of existence there. But he doesn't, right? And so, but he does speak, and they stumble backward, right, to prove that they can't take him unless he allows it. But then he asks again, right? Why does he ask that second time? Look at verse 7 through 9 of John 18. In John 18, 7 through 9, "Then asked he them again, Whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore ye seek me, let these go their way, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spake, Of them which thou gavest me, I have lost none." Right? Now, who do they have a warrant to arrest? Jesus. Right? Both times that he asks them, "Whom seek you?" they don't say Jesus and his disciples, do they? Both times they say Jesus of Nazareth. So he asks again to clarify. Right? Who are you here authorized to arrest? That's what he's asking there. It's only Jesus. Right? And Jesus asked them this question: if I'm the only one that you're seeking, if I'm the one you're here to arrest, then let the rest of these men go their way. Right? You don't have paperwork to arrest them. You can't legally take them. You've got paperwork to arrest me. Arrest me, let the rest of them go. That's what he's saying. Right? Now, if Jesus had allowed his disciples to go through the same trials that he went through, right? To go before the high priest, before that fake trial there, and then the Roman trials, if they'd gone through those same kind of trials that Jesus went through, even if they didn't die, right? What would have happened to them? More than likely, well, they'd have got discouraged, scared, really, and probably would have quit. Right? They're not strong in heart right now. Jesus has proved that. Right? They're not. They're not ready for that. Right? And he doesn't let that happen to them. 1 Corinthians 10:13, a very familiar verse, he says, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it." He's not going to allow them to be tempted more than what they can bear. They couldn't bear that kind of temptation if they went through those same trials that he's getting ready to go through. And so Jesus, as God, is not going to let them go through that. He is going to provide a way for them to escape. And so Jesus moves toward this mob. He proves that they can't take him. Then, unless he allows it, he verifies that they don't have the authority to arrest anyone except himself. Right? And that's to protect them. And Matthew 26:31 says, "Then Jesus saith unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad." They're just after Jesus, just after the leader, just after the shepherd. Remember Caiaphas in John chapter 11, if you want to turn over, John 11:49. Caiaphas had that same attitude. Right? If we just get rid of Jesus, we don't have to worry about the rest of them. In John 11:49 through 51, he says, "And one of them named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for that nation." Right? They don't need to kill all the disciples, because they think if they can get rid of Jesus, the rest of them are just going to fall away. They're just going to fade out. Right? And so, Jesus admits who he is. Right? And he exposes Judas as the betrayer to show the others that he knows their hearts. And this is what happens next. This is the account from Luke 22:49. And we talked about this a little bit before. Luke 22:49. When they which were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? They asked him, right? So they're going to take you. Do we go ahead and start swinging? They have 2 swords with them. Remember, Jesus asked them about that. They have those 2 swords. Before Jesus can even answer, what happens? Peter starts swinging in verse 50 of Luke 22. And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. We know from John's gospel here in John 18 that was Peter. We know the person whose ear was cut off was Malchus, the high priest servant there. And so John 18, back in John 18, 10 and 11, it says, Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus unto Peter, Put thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? Right? You know, we know for sure that Peter's trying to cut this guy's head off. He's not trying to nick his ear off. Right? The guy just ducks and he cuts his ear off there. But Peter has, you remember we talked about that shield of faith in Ephesians, where it's this door-sized shield, and you just hunker down, and none of the arrows or nothing can get to you. And when Peter has seen Jesus speak and all these guys fall back, he knows, even with just the 2 swords, they can't take them. They can't. Even hundreds of Roman soldiers there and others from the temple, he can't happen. And Peter says, we're invincible. Let's just go ahead and start knocking them down with the sword. And so that's, Peter thinks that he is protecting Jesus here. That's what he thinks. Jesus has been protecting them. Right? He's done that multiple times. Right? Here it started out here in this instance, causing the whole crowd of them to fall backward, getting them to admit that they only have authority to arrest him, not the rest of them there. And he's protecting them. And Peter thinks he's doing something honorable there, but he's acting out of what is still in his heart. What is he still full of in his heart? The sorrow. Right? The sorrow. Remember Jesus said your hearts are full of sorrow, and he's trying to get them out of that because they keep wanting to change God's plan. Jesus says, I've got to die. I'm going to raise again the 3rd day. And he says, the kingdom's not coming right now. And they don't want any of that. They don't want him to die. They want the kingdom to happen right now. And they're still full of sorrow there. And Peter is trying to stop what has to happen. In Luke 22:51, he says, and this is important, we get this detail. And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far. And he touched his ear and healed him. He puts Malchus's right ear back on and heals it there like it had never been removed. This is the last miracle that Jesus does before the cross. This is the last one by putting Malchus's ear back on. But he's still protecting his disciples. That's what he's doing. And you say, well, how is he protecting his disciples there? Right? You remember, they don't have any authority to arrest the disciples. Jesus has made sure of that. He's asked them twice, who are you seeking? And Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, if you're seeking me, let the rest of these men go their way. But now one of them has done what? Assaulted one of them, tried to kill one of them with a sword here with hundreds of witnesses. Right? You try to kill somebody and cut somebody's ear off with a sword for no good reason. It's not an act of war. Right? For no good reason, what is the Roman government going to do? Arrest you for sure, and then you're going to be tried for that. Right? That's what's happening here. Right? Jesus has now undone 2 things. He's undone the injury to Malchus by putting his ear back on, and he has undone the assault that Peter has just committed, which is worthy of arrest and a trial. There, they can't now go back with Peter, take him in with them and say, well, this guy tried to kill us and he cut this guy's ear off. And they say, what guy? And they say, well, this guy. That guy there that has nothing wrong with his ear? Right? They're not going to believe that. Right? So that's not going to stick. So he has released him from that. Matthew 26, last 2 verses, Matthew 26, 52 and 53. He says, Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? Right? By law, Peter should have been arrested and punished. Right? Genesis 9:6 says, Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. That's the law. Right? If you assault somebody, you cause injury to somebody, you're supposed to be punished for that. If it's not an act of war, right, just a personal vengeance there. And so God has made it abundantly clear in Scripture, we don't need a physical sword to defend God. We don't need those kind of things to harm people physically to defend His Word. We just need the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. The Word of God. Right? You know, the feelings that the hurt that's coming for Jesus, the feelings that Peter has, those are the right kind of feelings. They don't want to see their Lord suffer physical pain. They don't want to see Him be abused by the heathens. They don't want to see that. That's right. But because their heart is wrong, they have the wrong response to it. Right? They do something that is against the law and against God's plan. That's the same thing with us. When our hearts aren't right with God, the responses to temptations that we have, those won't be right either. Okay. Any questions? Any comments?